Welcome, everybody, to week 7 of the Age of Discovery. I'm excited to finish up the Portuguese portion. At least Portugal will still come into play a number of times when we're talking about Columbus. We'll hear about his dealings with the Portuguese crown. And then also when we get to Magellan, who is Portuguese but does not get money from the Portuguese crown or from royalty, decides to go to Spain. And so Magellan gets his money from Spain. And then when Portugal finds out Magellan is leaving and is going to circumnavigate the globe with under Spain's flag, then the Portuguese get upset about it and they try and chase him down. So even though we're moving on from the Portuguese portion of the Age of Discovery, there are going to be major players in Columbus's story, Magellan's story, and all of the people that we talk about after this. So I guess we're not fully leaving it, but we're going to wrap up talking about Vasco da Gama, some sort of final thoughts on what we think about Vasco da Gama. I'll ask you later, but hero, yes, no, and we'll talk about it. And then we'll talk about the two leaders that came, just really briefly, two leaders that came after Vasco da Gama, and how the colonization of India sort of failed after the next two people after Vasco da Gama had passed away. The two other leaders after him were good for Portugal, bad for India. But then after that, everything started falling apart for the Portuguese. So we'll talk about that. I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and share sound. I'm going to play some music for you a little bit later when I talk about the lasting impact of the Age of Discovery on Portuguese culture, because it still affects so many things that are in Portugal now are still affected by it. Can you guys see my screen? Is it showing the normal cover slide? Awesome. All right, so for today's agenda, we'll finish the technologies that propelled the Age of Discovery. If you remember, 2 weeks ago, we talked about the technologies that helped aid these navigators get to where they were going, find where they were going, and then the people that invented those technologies. We did not get all the way through each of them, and I had forgotten that we didn't get all the way through. So Daniel reminded us last week that we need to still talk about a couple more or a few more of those technologies. So we'll do that first. And then we'll finish up the story of Vasco da Gama, see what you guys think of him. Hero, not a hero, good guy, bad guy. Just talk about what you think of him and how he went about doing his work. We'll talk about the lasting effect of the Age of Discovery on Portuguese culture, and then we will have a Kahoot. So the Kahoot that we're going to do, I don't know if you guys are familiar with Kahoot. I suspect you are. If you are not, Kahoot is sort of like a quiz game. And so I have, I think, 16 or 17 multiple choice questions based on the adventures of Marco Polo and then based on the Last Crusade and and all of the supplemental content that we've talked about. And so then we have a question that comes up and you have like 30 seconds, 20 seconds to answer it. But when you're answering in Kahoot, if you answer the correct question fast, you get more points than if you answer the correct question slow. But if you answer the question wrong, you get 0 points. And so the idea is to answer the correct question as fast as you can, and the more points you get. And so we'll have a Kahoot based on those two things. Again, I think it's 16 or 17 multiple choice questions, and we will see who can take home the bragging rights, who will get the imaginary pastel de nata that they can eat, the championship pastel de nata that you can eat in your imagination. Or if I ever see you in person in Portugal, maybe I will buy you pastel de nata to commemorate the victory of your Kahoot today. So that's what we'll be doing today. Next week, we will be starting in a book about Columbus, Columbus, The Four Voyages by an author named Lawrence Bergreen. And the next two books and the remaining books of this class. So there's only 16 weeks, and we are just starting week 8. So when we meet next week, we'll be halfway done. Um, the last two books that we're going to read in this are by Lawrence Bergreen. This one is about Columbus. The first chapter, it gives sort of the middle of Columbus's story, talking about his discoveries when he discovered some of the islands in the Caribbean and I don't know, I guess some of the things that happened during that time. And then in chapter 2, we go back in time and sort of start with his upbringing, where he grew up. It talks about where he was growing up in the culture in Genoa in Italy. And it gives a lot more background to help us understand why Columbus may have been okay with the way things turned out in the Americas. Today, we look at some of the things he did as barbaric or just mean or cruel. And so when we're learning about the culture that he grew up in, we find he probably just thought it was normal to do that. And so it helps sort of paint the picture and give a background about some of the negative things about Columbus, some of the reasons why today, on Columbus Day in America, a lot of people are now calling it Indigenous People Day because they don't want to celebrate Columbus. And we'll find out, a little bit more background of why Columbus did those things that make people upset today. And back then, to him, they would have been normal and okay, and that's just how people lived their lives. And so it will give us a nice background on the history of Columbus and who he was and how he became who he was. So we'll just be reading the first two chapters. In the audio book version, I think that those are also the first two chapters. It might be chapters 2 and 3. I'll look and I'll confirm when I post the homework for those who are listening to the audio book or following along with the audio book. But the first two chapters each are in Audible. They take about an hour and 20 minutes apiece to get through on the 1.0 speed. Although in this book, the author talks slower, so I speed it up. Anyway, fascinating book. It's really interesting to learn more about Columbus, I think, and understand him and his story, and just sort of put some of the puzzle pieces together on who Columbus was and how he did what he did. Really a remarkable person. All right, so that's for today. So first, announcements. Office hours, I say this every week. Office hours are on Wednesday at 6 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Mountain. Stop by and ask any questions and talk about the content if you want. I'm here at my computer. Last night I had office hours. It is the first week that no one came, which is fine. I just continue working, doing my patent law stuff. And then when names pop up or don't, then I just keep working. But I'm here as a resource if you need me. All right. So for the first, and my screen is not showing. Oh, there it goes. For the first person, we skipped this over. I think, Addie, this might be yours. Abraham Zacudo. Zacudo. Tell us about Abraham Zacudo.
Okay, so he was a prominent Jewish astronomer, mathematician, and historian from Portugal. He's best known for his influential work with the Almanac Perpetuum, which included astronomical tables that greatly improved navigation at sea. His calculations helped explorers determine latitude more accurately, using the sun's altitude, which was crucial during the age of exploration. Zacudo's work was used by famous navigators such as Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. After the expulsion of Jews from Spain in 1492 and later from Portugal, Zacudo fled to North Africa, continuing his scholarly work and writing a historical chronicle of the Jewish people.
Awesome. He revolutionized a lot of things, didn't he? As Addie was saying, that he had a more accurate way of determining latitude, which is how far above the equator you are, how far below the equator you are, previously they could do longitude really well, which was how far to the east or to the west you were. And Zacuto really helped them understand latitude. Can you imagine if you are out at sea and you have nothing around you except water and you just can't figure out where you are on a map because there's no landmarks? I mean, it would be so frustrating, I think, to think, okay, I know how far east I am or how far west I am, but am I going toward like Maine in America or am I going toward Brazil? And to not be able to, I think that they would have understood if what side of the equator they were on just by looking at the sun. But Abraham Zacuto made that a lot more possible, helped them understand where exactly, or at least closer to where they were exactly on a map. Um, and he turned a lot of this stuff from just sort of an art-based maps were using more mathematical calculations and became a lot more accurate after his studies and the influence that he had over that. So awesome. Great job, Addie. Thank you. Um, all right. Next is the broadside cannon placement. Daniel, is this you?
Oh, yeah. Well, not gonna give the whole thing, but just some interesting facts that I found out. So, as you know, before the broadside cannon placement, the galleys were the favorite ship. Jacob, sorry, Jacob, but this is my kind of school. And they were only able to hold up to one cannon, and they were small, so they didn't really do very much damage. But then, when the first cannons were made, in fact, they called them the mouths of fire. That's kind of fun. The only problem was they didn't put them on ships for a long time because they could easily explode themselves. But until they, let's say, rebuilt and remodeled them, they put them on ships. And here's a fun fact. In movies, I always thought, why don't you just fire all of the cannons at the same time on the same broadside? Turns out if you do that, it'll flip the ship. So that was also an interesting fact. Also, this might not have, there was a famous sinking of, I think it's France? No, maybe British. I don't remember, but I do remember that there was a very big ship and they placed the cannons just too low in the water and left the gun ports open during a battle. And so when they were trying to make a sharp turn, the water gushed in the cannon ports and made it sink, since the cannons were too low in the water, so it unstabilized it. That's another cool fact. And remember, the galley had 2 small cannons on it. Some ships had about 3 batteries, so some could have about up to 100 cannons, and like the big guys. So it wasn't just the small ones. So. And this is a fun fact too. At first, they actually didn't want to sink and kill. They actually just wanted to get them out of their territory. So they didn't want to sink and kill until a while later. So it was really cool how they didn't sink ships. They only said, "This is our territory, get out now." I also learned that ships changed because they wanted to put more cannons on, more military power. So it was just really interesting that they changed ships just because they needed bigger cannons and bigger naval fleets. And here's another fun fact. A cannon could be loaded in 8 minutes when someone professional could do it. But now we can just fire it in 1 to 2 minutes. So that's a really interesting fact that I thought. They also made the English carronade. That was a deadly weapon. It shot chain shots, and that could take off a whole ship's mast. So it was really powerful. But it was small, short distance, so you could just cripple it and run away, or just now with the 100 cannons, they didn't want to board ships anymore. So they just made a line. So here's a naval tactic that would shape the world. And Vasco da Gama, I think, put it into action first, like the video said. He made a line of ships and he fired on the other ships. And then he circled around and did the same thing on the other side. So I think that's a pretty cool tactic. Because you kind of encircle them, don't let them escape, but you're also bombarding them at the same time. Well, those are a few facts that I learned, and sorry I took so long, but
No, that's awesome.
few facts I learned.
Yeah, the cannon totally changed naval battles, right? Before the cannon, and even I guess when they had the earlier versions of the cannon, you just sort of pull up alongside, throw grappling hooks across, tie the boats together, and jump over with your swords. And so the cannon gave you something that you could do a little bit longer distance. But as Daniel was saying, originally the cannons weren't intended to sink other ships. It was more of, I have this powerful gun, so leave me alone, or kind of I guess, a mental defense, right? So people didn't want to mess with you because you had all these guns. And then they started improving the accuracy and the different quality of the cannons and the different jobs. I mean, you could fire a shot or chains at out of a cannon towards the mast, and it would rip up all of their cells, and it would rip up the mast and break it, and so they would be immobilized, which was a big problem if you're the ship that has now lost your mast and your cells are no longer working. Um, and originally, they would put the cannons up on the top of the deck, which was problematic for weight. It was also creating a different angle, so you're shooting down. But having these cannons sort of on the broadside, so the cannons that are below deck
They
have a better
shoot
angle to
more.
shoot across. And if you miss, if you're shooting this big rock ball, right? And if you aim a little bit low, has anyone ever skipped a rock on a pond? The same thing could happen with a cannonball. If you're shooting up high and going down and you miss, it might just sink into the water. But if you have a lower angle, it's like when you're skipping rocks, you're not like throwing above your head, right? You're kind of like getting down low, throwing sidearm. And so the lower angle would allow the cannonballs to sort of skip across the water and still hit the target if you aimed a little bit too low. And so there are a lot of different advances that happened during this time when they were trying to get an upper hand on other people. And the broadside cannon placement, putting a line of cannons along the broadside of your boat and then even down a little bit lower were tactics that were used to help do that. Great job, Daniel.
Right. They had more accuracy below,
Yeah.
too. And on top, if they were hit below deck in waters and water started seeping in and they tried to man the pumps, on top, the cannons would start tipping it, so there would be no chance of escape at all.
Yeah. 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 It's interesting, all of these innovations that occurred that people may not have foreseen, but then they thought, oh, wait a minute, what if we try this, try it, and it works? And then that just became the way things were. That's awesome. Thank you, Daniel. Last one for today, I think. The chip, log, and sand glass. Eliza, is that you?
Yeah. All right. So, real quick, the chip log and sandglass method was an invention used by sailors to determine like their speed. And so what they do is they'd attach the chip log to the log line, The log line is that like reel of thread, I guess, or string. And um the log line had these different knots tied at different intervals, and it's typically around 47 feet apart. Anyway, so they'd attach the chip log to it and they'd throw it off the side of the boat, and then they'd flip the timer, which was usually around 30 seconds, and then count how many knots went over the side of the boat through that period of time. And however many knots went over the boat was how many like nautical miles an hour they were traveling. And
Awesome.
I tried to figure out who invented these different things. It's believed that William Bourne invented the chip log in 1574. I couldn't find out who invented the log line though, or the hourglass or the sand glass, because it like is dated like back to like ancient Egyptians, like around like 800 BC. So yeah.
That's cool. That's cool. Can you imagine driving in a car and you're wondering, hey, how fast are we going? And so whoever's driving asks Eliza to figure out our speed. And so here she is sticking her arm out the window with this big log, right? And then drop something on the ground, and then you measure how fast it takes the line to go out to a certain knot. I think that's an interesting way. I mean, it worked, right? And they didn't have rotations per minute that they could measure like on a car or anything, but they're pretty accurate, surprisingly. And I don't know how often they would take these readings, and maybe it was when they felt like a wind change, or maybe it was every half hour or something. But using this chip log and sandglass set, they could kind of understand, okay, we have gone this direction for this long at this speed, so we must be pretty close to here. Occasionally they would get lost and wouldn't know exactly where they were, but it was remarkable how, without a lot of instrumentation that we have today with satellites and things, they still had a pretty accurate idea of where they were in the water at the time. It's pretty cool. Great explanation, Eliza. Thank you. Good job. All right, and we've already talked about those. So I want to skip to Vasco da Gama. What do you guys think? Good, bad, okay? Does it depend on where you grow up, how you would view Vasco da Gama? What do you guys think of Mr. da Gama? Daniel, go ahead.
Well, I think that since he grew up hating Islam, I think it was kind of natural for him to just sink all the Islam's ships. And his country was small and not that rich, so I also get why he wanted to have all the riches and spices to help his country. And I also, most people won't get this, but I get his temper of bombarding the city of Calicut. In fact, I think the Raja was the meaner or the worse because I have a temper like Vasco da Gama and I get why he did that. So it was actually really interesting seeing how a fellow kind of hothead would react with power.
I like that insight and interest. I appreciate your self-awareness about that. And I think it also illustrates the trouble that you could get yourself into by being so reactionary, right? Um, yeah, that's an interesting thing. And one thing I really appreciated about this book is the effort that the author put into kind of helping us understand the Holy War, to understand this um, rivalry between Islam and Christianity, dating back to long before Vasco da Gama found himself in India, right? So it's kind of helping us understand when we get to this point, the way they're treating each other was how they've been doing it for hundreds or thousands of years. And so it wasn't just because Vasco was a bad guy and he had this temper and he would do whatever at all costs. that was sort of just the way of going about it. And I think it's nice to have that understanding. And we'll see that again with Columbus because it turns out to be very similar story in a totally different part of the world and in a different way, but similar. And we'll talk about that in a few weeks, the similarities. But yeah, really how he grew up sort of helps us understand why it was that way. Um, but even with that, so Daniel, would you say yes, Vasco da Gama hero, or
I mean, the I don't remember the merchant ship's name, but how he killed all the women and children and men, that wasn't very heroic at all. I mean, he didn't even take the spices. Now, that was
right?
just a bloodbath. I would not have done that. I would have taken the spices and then killed them.
Or just let him go, right? I think I would
Yeah,
have been
just
like, "Oh, you're gonna give me this much money? Yeah, go, leave." Just, I mean, I didn't
yeah, and
want to
then when
fight
they come
anyway.
back with more money, and then when they come back with more money, do the same thing. Just keep taking all the money from the merchant ships, and those who refuse, bye bye.
All right, so if we put like started categorizing different columns of people in our class, I think Daniel is safely in the category of would be a pirate. Um, that's exactly what pirates are doing. Take your money. Next time you come back, take it again. Next time you come back, take it again. Um, that's funny. Thank you, Daniel. What else? What do you guys think? I totally agree with the merchant ship. I feel like that was really mishandled and it was upsetting. And I was going to skip that in our reading, but I felt like it was an important part of the story to just kind of show how far he was going to create this shock and awe kind of thing to to make them afraid of him and to fear what he could do and use
Right.
and his using he wanted to use that for power and so I understand why he was doing it. I was gonna not read it, but I felt like it was a big part of the story and so I kept it.
Yeah, it was because if he did do that, um, all of the cities, like I think it's Goa and maybe no, Calicut in my in my in my mind is bad. Um,
Cananor maybe.
yeah, all those other kind of cities, they didn't want to be destroyed. They saw how those people were just put to rest, and they did not want that to happen. So it did get a few cities under his control and power. So it is a very big part.
Yeah. And if you're Portuguese, Vasco da Gama is he's a huge hero here. So many things are named after him. Um, he is honored, and I saw a magazine in the grocery store a few months ago that were talking about the top 10 Portuguese people or the top 10 people that have influenced the culture and history of Portugal. And I think he was in the top five. Um, Henry the Navigator was also in the top five or in the top. Both of them were in the top 10 for sure, right next to Cristiano Ronaldo, the soccer player. But he's has huge importance, and so if you're on Portugal's side, then what he did was fantastic for the country, and I think they look past all of the other stuff and just say that's what had to be done when you were colonizing in the 1500s. That's what needed to be done in order to do it, and they justify it in that way. Um, so it's just an interesting thing to think about. Was he a hero? Was he the right person for the job? He certainly was the right person for the job, and he had the right personality to make sure that his crews were following the line, keeping the rules, doing what they were supposed to, following orders, and he was a good leader and a great commander, and he did what needed to be done for the crown, for Portugal. Maybe the way he went about it wasn't always the best, but he certainly was the right person for the job at the time. And I think if anyone else had different character traits trying to do what he did, maybe it wouldn't have worked out. So in history, so after Vasco da Gama, the first person that really truly governed India for Portugal was named Francisco de Almeida, and he came in and he was pretty ruthless also. His goal when he got to India was to control the sea, not the land. And so his strategy when he arrived was to dominate by naval power rather than going inland and conquesting in that way. And he was ruthless. He was a little worse than Vasco da Gama, but he ruled with an iron fist. And then he was replaced by a man named Alfonso de Albuquerque. So in American or English, we'd say Albuquerque, like Albuquerque, New Mexico. That's his last name. But in Portuguese, Albuquerque. And he was also led with an iron fist. He seized Goa, seized Malacca, Hormuz, and he really established the colonies there. They started building fortresses in India, and he was very loyal to the crown. So was Almeida. And because they were loyal to the crown, they were making sure all of the ships that were coming and going were paying the appropriate taxes to Portugal. After Albuquerque leaves, the next person that came in was a little bit more corrupt, not as loyal to the king. And so a lot of the merchants started taking advantage. They started to sort of lose control over what was happening, and they didn't have enough people there. They didn't have enough. I mean, Portugal is a pretty small country. They just don't have a lot of people, and so to be spread out in Brazil and throughout Africa and then over in India, they just had a hard time maintaining that huge amount of land, the amount of colonies that they had all over the place. And so after Albuquerque died, they slowly started losing their grip on India, and eventually the English came into play. The Ottoman Empire started going down into that space, and then also the Netherlands or the Dutch had bigger boats that could be more efficient and could hold more. And they started taking up the trade routes that Portugal had had, and they were doing it better than Portugal, and they had more people to defend their colonies and things in India. And so they started to lose ground, Portugal did. But there's such a lasting impact on the culture of Portugal, even today. There's so many things, like we were talking about on the flag that I showed you. So many things on today's flag still point back to that maritime navigation discovery. It's interesting that Portuguese, even though Portugal is such a small country, today Portuguese is the fifth most spoken language in the world. I think first is Mandarin, and then English, and then Hindi, I think, and Spanish is in there too, but Portuguese is fifth. So you have Portugal that speaks Portuguese, Brazil, Angola, which is where some of the Portuguese colonies were in Africa, and Mozambique. They still speak Portuguese, and so they even speak Portuguese, I believe, still in parts of India. And in China, I believe there is a province or a city that speaks Portuguese too. It's like a little Portugal in China. Portugal still maintains its maritime identity. It's a seafaring nation. There's a merchant marine. There's fishermen. It really has so much to do with the water. The cuisine influences a lot of traditional Portuguese foods have cinnamon in it, pepper, cloves. They became such a huge part of Portuguese cooking. They have peppers that they use called piri piri, and Portuguese chicken is piri piri chicken. It's like a spicy chicken that they have that is a big dish. And architecture, music. So there's a type of music called fado that came to play, and the fado music is sort of like the equivalent to the blues in America. So in America, blues are like sad songs singing about unhappiness and what everything that's going wrong in your life and sad. And fado music is sort of the Portuguese equivalent, but it's about their sailors and explorers and the sad and hard things that they go through. I wanted to play just a quick clip of one of my favorite fado songs about Lisbon. So the song is um, Lisboa Menina e Moça is what it's called, and it's like a poetic song about Lisbon. So this is sort of like a sailor or someone from Lisbon who is away that's singing about the beauty of Lisbon. It's kind of a sad thing. And one of the cool things with fado music is they have a normal guitar, like what you and I know as a guitar, and then they have a Portuguese guitar that is, you'll see it, and it's got a rounder body, and there's just two guitars playing classical guitar, and it sounds to me often like they have multiple, like there's more than two people playing, just because their fingers are moving so fast, plucking so many strings. So I'll just play a small clip of this. This is from The Voice, I think the Portuguese edition. They had this celebrity singer come and sing this song. Um, I'm going to play probably like 5 seconds of it and just want to make sure that the audio is going through. And then I'll play another couple of minutes after if the audio is working. Is the audio working? Excellent. All right, so we'll just play a little bit of the song just to kind of get a feel for what fado is. If you're ever in Portugal, you'll hear fado playing in the background, especially in a lot of the traditional touristy places. But I love this kind of music. I think it's relaxing.
No castelo ponho um cotovelo, em Alfama eu descanso o olhar, e assim desfaço o novelo de azul e mar. À ribeira eu encosto a cabeça, à almofada da cama do Tejo, com lençóis bordados à pressa, na cambaraia de um beijo. Lisboa, menina e moça, da luz que os meus olhos veem, teus seios são as colinas, pregão que me traz à porta.
I just finished saying that there is two guitarists and then they show three on stage. Awesome. Good job for me. But traditionally they have two. And so in this song, he's singing about how Lisbon is like a beautiful girl and a beautiful woman combined into one, and just talking about different parts of the city. And so it's sort of a sad love song about missing the city of Lisbon. It's uh, if you're ever in Portugal, fado music is really cool. There's a lot of places in Lisbon down. So traditionally, it was down by the waterfront, where you would go into different places, a bar, a saloon, whatever, and they'd be playing fado music. Now you go to restaurants and they have fado singers and guitarists that are playing while you're eating, which is a lot of fun. Um, but so the Portuguese culture has so much to do with maritime, so much to do with the Age of Discovery, what Vasco da Gama did, what Bartolomeu Dias did. All of these people spent their lives, dedicated their lives to advancing Portugal in this way, and it's interesting that still, this many years later, 500 years later, we're still affected by it positively. In fact, it still is a huge part of the identity of Portugal. Um, it's been fun to learn more about Vasco da Gama with you and all these other Portuguese explorers. But now we're going to move on to Christopher Columbus, who will try to travel under the Portuguese flag. They decide not to give him any money, so he goes to Spain and receives their endorsement and their money and their ships. And so we'll start reading about Christopher Columbus next week. Which brings us next to Kahoot. So let me pull up my Kahoot. If you guys have another device, Oh, I thought I had it already. I do not. It'll take me just a second. If you guys have a device, pull it on out. You can also open up a new tab to get to it. Let's see. Exit. It's giving me a lot of pop-ups. View profile, age of discovery. Let's see, host live. Sorry, this is taking, I should have had this ready. Okay. All right, so the way that you'll join is you go to www.kahoot.it. So there's the link right here. And then it will ask you for a PIN, and the PIN is 233196. When you join, please join with your real name so that we know who is who. Grace, yeah, you have a question.
So, should I do that? Sorry, in the background. Should I do it on this electronic, or should I try and find another electronic?
I think you can still do it on this.
So should
I think
sorry, should I leave the meeting and then put in that
if
code,
you
or
if you have to leave the meeting, maybe another device would be better. But if you can leave the meeting running in the background so you can still hear the audio of the meeting, you don't have to see us. Then you could just go open a browser and do it in that way.
yeah, I'll just ask my dad and see if he can help me about it.
Okay. Will, same question for you?
No, I have a different device. What was the link again or whatever?
Yeah, www dot
Okay.
KAHOOT dot IT.
Okay.
And then it will ask you for a PIN.
And do I go to that website?
Yeah, go to that website, and then when you get there on the page, it will ask you for a PIN for the game. And then the PIN, when you tell me when you get there, I can give you the PIN.
Okay. It's not working.
Okay, www.kahoot.it. You having any luck? Grace, are you having luck?
I go to it and it just says, what type of account would you like to create? Teacher, professional, student, or personal? What is that?
I don't think I'm not sure. Maybe is there an option to skip?
Nope.
Does anybody else know to answer that? I have not had that issue. Has anyone else have that come up? Grace, go ahead.
So when I made it to it, I figured it out. But it's asking for my game pin. Is that just like my name, or
No,
what
so
is it?
the game pin is 233196.
Okay, got it. Thank you.
So there was an option for Kahoot.com as well as Kahoot.it. So I'm wondering if maybe there's a difference with that.
There could be.
Someone might have accidentally clicked the .com.
Yeah, so it'd be Kahoot.it. Braden, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I'm pretty sure if you just type in kahoot.it and then click enter, it should just say enter game pin. I don't know if you accidentally did kahoot.com or if you accidentally clicked some other link, but just try doing going back to that.
Hopefully that'll fix. Thanks, Braden. Thanks, Daniel's mom. Will, are you and Grace in the same place? You could go and team up if you want. The Oldham family.
I think I might have gotten it to work now.
Okay, cool. Let's see, we've got almost, I think will be the last one, and then we'll get started. And then the game pin when you need it is 233196. Excellent. We're all here. All right, let's go. Let's do this. I'll usually in between questions, I talk about the answers. I'll try and be quick so that we can get through before class is over. Oh, Anna just joined too. Is everybody here? Anyone trying to join who has not yet joined? Okay, here we go. All right, Age of Discovery, Kahoot 1. Here we go. First question. Where was Marco Polo born? Close the door, bud. He was born in Venice. We were talking a little earlier about Genoa. That's where Columbus is from. But Venice is the correct answer.
Say Marco and then the person that.
At what age did Marco Polo first travel to Asia with his father and uncle? Go out, bud. Close the door. I heard you. I know that game. In the pool. All right, he went at 17. 12, he was still at home. His dad and his uncle were gone. He was not, they did not, were not there to raise him, but he was at 17, he left with his uncle and dad. Oliver and, 2-point difference. San Antonio is getting things fast. What great Mongol ruler did Marco Polo serve? Kublai Khan. Good job. Oh, man. All right. We've got a lot of people right there. Good work. Which modern day country was Cathay, the land Marco Polo described? China. It was China, Cathay. A lot of the riches and silks and things were from there. Oh, it didn't look like anybody moved in the top 5 at least. Who wrote down Marco Polo's stories when they were both in prison? Rustichello of Pisa. I'd be curious, out of the 2 that got that right, which of you was a complete guess versus you actually knew it? I'm just curious. Nice. Oliver, complete guess, or you knew it?
I knew he was from Pisa, but that was it.
Cool. Good job. Whoa, commanding lead.
It was a complete guess.
Yeah, nice job. What navigation tool was essential for Vasco da Gama? Astrolabe. Yeah, that was something that they used often to determine where they were located. It was one of the three or four different tools, but it was one of the more important ones, maybe the most important one, but it was definitely essential. Which Portuguese king sponsored Vasco da Gama's voyage? It was King Manuel. Remember the architecture, Manuelian architecture? He was the fortunate one who took over the king or the crown at probably the easiest time to take it over to become rich and influential as a king, because everyone else had paved the way before him. King Manuel. What religious order was Vasco da Gama associated with? The Order of Santiago. Knights Templar were really important in Portugal, and they have a lot of things that are still in Portugal from the Knights Templar, and they're probably the most famous. He was part of the Order of Santiago that was in his region of Portugal in Singe, and he wanted, when he came back, the king said, "What do you want?" And he said, "I want to have Singe. I want this area." And the Order of Santiago would not give up their hold on that part of the country, even though he was part of them. And anyway, it became a lot of drama about who could control that part of the country. But he was part of the Order of Santiago. Why is Gil Inês remembered in Portuguese history? He sailed beyond Cape Bojador. Perfect. Good job. And the next question is going to also be about Cape Bojador, I think. So remember, I'm not going to talk anymore about the Cape. Why is Cape Bojador such a feared barrier before Gil Inês? Nice. Yes, sea monsters and boiling waters. I just noticed, I think that the font on that one may have been bold for the correct answer. I'm not sure if it showed up on your side, so I wonder if that was my mistake. Could be. And I may have just, I wonder if I did that on every one. We'll see. Sea monsters and boiling water. Yes, correct. They were worried. They thought that they couldn't pass that point because if they did, their ship would just fall into the ocean, would be swallowed up, or that monsters would attack. But when he went around it, sort of opened up the path, paved a new way for them to go further. What did Pedro de Covilha's mission accomplish? So Pedro de Covilha, remember, was the Jewish spy that they sent out to go and get a better understanding of how the trade was occurring in the Indian Ocean. He also was supposed to go try and find Prester John. Eventually, he did find Prester John and then stayed with Prester John because when they found him years and years later, he had a wife and children and was living a happy life there. But he went out on an exploratory mission to get information to pass back so they knew what to expect when they arrived with their ships later. Ooh, still a lot of people close to the top. Good job. What landmark did Bartolomeu Dias become the first European to sail past? The Cape of Good Hope. Good job. Definitely Bartolomeu Dias' legacy on that. Who is credited with discovering Brazil for Portugal in the 1500s? Pedro Alvarez Cabral. And it was an accident. They weren't even meaning to find it. They sort of got blown off course a little bit further than they expected. And suddenly there was land, and then there was Portugal, and then that's it. It was Cabral that found it. Magellan circumnavigates the globe long after these guys. Bartolomeu Diaz goes down to the Cape of Good Hope, Da Gama around the Cape of Good Hope in India. And then Cabral came after Da Gama. He was the second group going to India, and they got blown off course and found Brazil. Brazil. All right, Anna keeping the lead. Oh boy. What did Prince Henry establish at Sagres that helped Portugal lead exploration? School of Navigation. The spice markets were in Lisbon mostly. The School of Navigation, I should have said, allegedly started this School of Navigation. It wasn't like a school where you sit down and learn these things. It was more a place where sailors and navigators could share ideas and secrets. And as you came back, a lot of people would go to Sagres because it was a safety spot to get out of the stormy Atlantic Ocean. They had a harbor that you could kind of get your ship into and be protected. And that's where they would share information about their voyages to help other people. So it's sort of a school, but more just a place to share ideas and to help each other. Oh boy. Two more questions. During the conquest of Ceuta, which of King John I's sons was left behind? Wow, that was quick. Ferdinand, yes. And sadly, he was never brought home. He was left there as sort of, he was sick to begin with and not feeling well, so he didn't go home. But then when they were trying to get out of Ceuta, they wanted to give the city back to the people of Northern Africa. And as part of the trade, they gave up Ferdinand, and he died in prison among the Berbers in Northern Africa. And he is now considered Saint Ferdinand. He's on the Monument of the Discoverers, too, up right next to his brother, Prince Henry. I think one more question. Can Oliver and James and maybe Braden best Anna on this one? We'll see. Who was Philippa of Lancaster? She was the mother of Prince Henry the Navigator and his brothers. So they were the illustrious, what do they call illustrious age? Or anyway, her boys were the ones that went to Ceuta, took it over, became John the Second, I think. And one of her sons became the king. Prince Henry the Navigator was her son. Anyway, she was the mother of all of them, and she was an awesome person that sort of instilled in them this sense of honor and wanting to go and improve in their country and make it better and be brave and those things. Really remarkable woman. Third place, Braden. Nice job. Second, Oliver and James, the Check-Its team. And number one, Anna. Good job. Well done. Daniel and Addie close behind. Good job. All right, I will stop sharing. Well done, everybody. Good job. It's been fun to talk about the Portuguese portion of the Age of Discovery. It's a fun way to wrap it up. Well done. Anna, I owe you a pastel de nata. You might still have some at your house. Maybe you could make some as your to celebrate your victory over the others. But if you're ever in Portugal, I will have a pastel de nata waiting for you as your trophy that you can eat and celebrate your victory, I guess. Good job. All right, so for next week, I'll post the homework. We're going to start reading again Columbus, The Four Voyages by Lawrence Bergreen. We'll read chapters 1 and 2. I will double check on the audio book. It might be different chapters. It might be pushed off by one. There might be an epilogue, which is chapter 1 in audiobook. But I'll indicate both just so that there's not any confusion with what we're doing. But remember, in the physical copy, chapters 1 and 2, the supplemental content will focus more on Spain and Christopher Columbus, and we'll be shifting over to the other part of the Iberian Peninsula to talk about what else was going on. So thanks for all you guys are doing. Good work. Keep up the good work. We will talk to you, keep up the good work. Keep posting all of the good content, and I look forward to next week. Have a great weekend, and we will see you next time.